Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our Gardening for Bats presentation, part of Georgia Native Plants Month 2023. My name is Dottie Head, and I am the Director of Communications at Georgia Audubon. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. We are recording today's webinar, and we will email the link to the recording to all registered participants within the next week. You may also enable closed captioning for this webinar by clicking the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please add any questions you have into the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many questions as possible today. When we presented this as a live presentation in manuals, we had a lot of questions, so we're hoping for a good conversation. This year marks our 6th annual Georgia Grows Native for Birds Month. Your participation directly supports Georgia Audubon's conservation, education, and community engagement programs. So I want to thank you and the Georgia Grows Native patrons whose names you've seen scrolling on our slides. We couldn't put on this event without their support. I'm excited today to host this webinar, and I'm going to turn things over to our instructor, a familiar face to many of us, Roseanne Guerra. Rose is a New Orleans native who moved to the Atlanta area in 1988 with a freshly minted computer science degree, but her true passion has always been nature and wildlife. Her wildlife and education experience includes animal rehabilitation, performing in Zoo Atlanta's free-flighted bird shows, and leading many bird walks, garden club, master gardener programs, school field trips, canoe trips, and scout programs. She is a frequent Georgia Audubon field trip and program leader, and also leads trips for Dunwoody Nature Center in the city of Sandy Springs and the Chattahoochee Nature Center, among others. She recently joined Georgia Audubon team as a part-time education coordinator. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rose and let her start sharing her slides. So Rose, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dottie. Let's get my share going. All righty. All right, Dottie, am I sharing? Looking good?
You're looking good. You're looking good.
All right, thank you so much. And it's such a thrill to present to Georgia Audubon. This is a full circle moment for me. I did start out in the computer industry and was a stay-at-home mom for a while. And then in 2012, I took the Georgia Audubon Master Birder class, and it kind of launched me down this new path in life. I started volunteering with Audubon's education team and then started contracting for them. And then I started volunteering with the Department of Natural Resources and their bat group. And it's so wonderful to come and present to Audubon tonight. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to zip through them pretty quick, but hopefully that'll keep folks awake. I know we've had a long day at work today, but today we're talking gardening for bats in Georgia. I'm going to try and keep this as Georgia specific as I can. The bat in that picture is a tricolor bat in an oak. All right, here's our what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to start at the big picture. What is a mega bat versus a micro bat? Those are our two orders of bats. And then we'll drill down to our common bats in Georgia, what's affecting our bats and how to help them. And then we'll get into the gardening for bats. And everybody wants to know about bat boxes, so we will certainly touch on that tonight. But let's start with, a lot of people find bats frightening and creepy, but there are a lot of bats in the world, and a lot of them are just absolutely beautiful, even to anybody would consider these types of bats as being really beautiful animals. These are both types of fruit bats, so you would not find these in Georgia, but they are beautiful. Some more bats. The one on the left there is another fruit bat that at a rehab place in Australia, and that's kind of where bats get the nickname of sky puppies. Some people call them rats with wings, but us bat people prefer sky puppies. The bat on the right with the white fur is a pallid bat, and that is a North American bat. That's a desert Southwest bat, and I just think they're really pretty. But yeah, I admit some bats are downright weird looking. This is a hammerhead bat on the right, and a Cassin's cotton top bat, a little bit weird looking. The bat on the left is a horseshoe bat, and they call it because their nose is shaped like a horseshoe. They echolocate through their nose instead of through their mouths. So it's like they're humming their echolocation. So that weird nose is to help them with echolocation. And then this guy on the right, boy, he looks straight out of Lord of the Rings, doesn't he? This is a tube nose bat. He's another bat that echolocates by humming through his nose. But yeah, he looks straight like a orc out of Lord of the Rings. All right, so we're going to start at the big picture. Bats of planet Earth. They are the order Chiroptera, which means hand wing. Bird wings, their wings consist, there are no finger bones through the wings. They only have feathers from hanging down from the leading edge, whereas bats have finger bones that come down all the way through their wings. They're the second largest order of mammals. Rodents are the number one. So if you lined up every mammal on planet Earth, one after the other, it would be rodent, rodent, bat, and then, zebra and cat. And then rodent, rodent, bat, human being, and horse. Rodent, rodent, bat. So one species out of every 5 species of mammals is some kind of bat. There's a lot of bats. They are the only mammal capable of flight. Flying squirrels only glide. Bats do actually fly. There are 1,240 different kinds of bats. Indonesia is kind of bat central. 47 are found in the US, and only 16 are found in our entire state. And not all of those will you find in Metro Atlanta area. So we don't have a lot of the world's numbers of bats. But yeah, there are 2 suborders, megabats and microbats. But those terms are now a little out of date. Just a few years ago, it was discovered what the difference is physically between a megabat and a microbat. And they've been renamed to yin and yang bats, which is useful to nobody. At least with mega and micro, the megabats tend to be large and the microbats tend to be small. Yin and yang doesn't really help much, but yin is what we used to call megabats, and yang is what we used to call microbats. All right, so the megabats or the yin tend to be your bigger fruit-eating bats. That's not 100%, but they tend to be your bigger fruit-eating bats, nectar-drinking bats. They tend to not echolocate, but that's not 100% true. The smallest is only 2.5 inches from wingtip to wingtip. So we're talking, hummingbird size. And the largest is over 5.5 feet. And I don't know if y'all can see my image of me, but it's one thing to say it's a 5.5-foot bat, but I actually cut out a silhouette. And this is a 5.5-foot bat silhouette. Give you an idea. So that is what the largest bat on planet Earth looks like right now. Kind of intimidating, but it is a fruit bat. It is a diurnal, a daytime living fruit bat. Once again, found out in Indonesia and Africa. And most of our megabats or yin bats roost in trees, a few roost in caves. Yeah, I just threw this picture in to give you a sense of scale. That's that same 5.5-foot wingspan bat. Not that I recommend handling bats. All right, once again, megabats are only found in Africa and Asia and Australia. Notice 0 in the Americas. So we do not have any megabats in the Americas at all. All right, so now let's get a little closer to home. Microbats. Microbats have a lot more diversity in the world. There are microbats that specialize. As you can see here, there's one with a fish. Can you believe microbats can echolocate and see fish under the surface of the water? So these bats actually grab them when these fish are under the surface of the water. They can actually see them through echolocation. Yeah, and I hope that frog in the middle has said its final words, because it's just about to meet its little froggy maker. And then, of course, we have vampire bats on the right. These slides are put together by the DNR, and my boss at the DNR loves bouncy fade-ins, so I hope y'all do too. Okay, so these go from 1.1 inches and weigh 2 grams. A hummingbird weighs about 3 grams, so even less than a ruby-throated hummingbird. And the largest is 39 inches, and they do echolocate. And most of them do roost in caves. So that's the smallest. Those are pictures of the smallest and the largest. And what's their superpower? Microbats echolocate. And I loved this little cartoon off the web. The bat saying Marco and the moth saying Polo. Oh, oops. Although I had to find one without a cuss word in it. All right, so drilling down closer to home, this is the DNR's poster, Bats of Georgia, and those are the 16 bats that can be found in Georgia. Here it is. And then there it is. And on the other side of the ranges for all the bats. So if you can look up here a minute, you can see some of them are statewide, some are north only, some are coastal, some are south only. Some are migratory. So I'm not going to go over all 16. That would be too much to go through. I'm just going to touch on the ones that are most commonly seen in Metro Atlanta. Oh, more fancy. All right, and here's our distribution for microbats. And you can see it's planet-wide, except in the Arctic and Antarctic. Much more diverse than the megabats. All right, microbats are pollinators. All bats, not all bats, some bats are pollinators and fruit eaters. So they're seed dispersers, just like birds. However, no bats in Georgia are pollinators. And I have been to nature centers in Georgia that had signage about how important bats are as pollinators. But actually there are no bats in Georgia that are pollinators. There are some out in the desert southwest of the United States, but basically our United States bats are not pollinators. But that being said, down south of the border, the picture of the bat pollinating the agave there. We all know what agave is used for, to make tequila. And agave is adapted to be pollinated by bats. So if we lose our long-nosed bats, we will lose our margaritas. So support your bats. If we lose our long-nosed bats, we lose our margaritas. So as we said, most of the United States bats are microbats, and all Georgia bats are microbats. So just some generalizations about Georgia bats. And I know I have pictures here of bats in the hand. I am not recommending that you handle bats, obviously. But it's really the only way to get a sense of scale with these PowerPoint pictures. So think about in this picture, how big is that person's fingernail? It's about the same as that red bat's head. But all Georgia bats are small. This is a eastern red bat. This is a silver-haired bat. Once again, think about the size of that person's thumbnail. That's about the size of that bat's head. So these are small animals. Georgia bats are very camouflaged. So find the bat. This is a lot easier on a webinar than it is at Manuel's Tavern on the tiny TVs. But yeah, there's a red bat curled up in the center of that photograph. You can see its forearm. You can outline with the mouse. There's our forearm. This is an ear, the back, and then they have a wonderful fur-covered tail that acts like a blanket, and they wrap their belly with their little blanket that's covered in fur. We're going to talk about exactly what he's doing in that picture. Actually, we'll come back to that. There's the silver-haired bat that they're camouflaged against tree bark. Remember how small it is. Think how hard it would be to find that bat if you were actually looking for it. All righty, so we're going to touch on, like I said, the common bats that we would find around the metro area. We're just going to touch on about 5 of them. But as far as Metro Atlanta, depending on how you count it, we would probably find some more rare than others, around 10 of the 16 species found in Georgia. This is one of our most common, the big brown bat. And I think they're kind of puppy looking, although they do have big mouths full of teeth. The wingspan, wingtip to wingtip, is 13 to 14 inches. They are resistant to white nose syndrome, and we will get into that later. But these are not big, group up in the cave in the wintertime and snuggle up and hibernate bats. These bats are mostly solo or small groups, and they are found statewide. And they are a beetle specialist. Nighttime beetles. So I like to think, what are your big nighttime beetles? June bugs, right, in Georgia. All right, here's the little brown bat, and look at that face. Oh my gosh, they are just so adorable to me. But they do have a very similar look to a big brown bat. You know, it'd be hard to tell them apart on the wing. They're just smaller. However, these are cave bats. These hibernate in caves, and these guys have been hit hard by white nose syndrome. These guys specialize in wasps and moths. This is an eastern red bat that we've looked at a couple pictures of, and you can kind of see in that picture his little tail. That's his blanket that he's got wrapped underneath him. The males are this bright orange color, and the females are more brown. And then what we have there, they hibernate in leaf litter. Very unique. You don't think about bats as hibernating in leaf litter, but these guys do. They're found statewide, but in the winter, the northern ones do migrate to get out of the mountain winters. And this is a hoary bat, and I'm just realizing, let's see, I pulled up my wall. Hang on, let me stop for 1 second and flip over to my updated PowerPoint, if y'all don't mind. 1 sec. Sorry about this. Sorry. All right. All right, sorry about that. Y'all seeing the slideshow?
We're seeing the slide, but you need to start it, you need to start from where you left off.
All right, I'm sorry about that. Technical difficulties. I'm just, it wasn't letting me put it up, so I will just. All right, hoary bats. Okay, hoary in this context means covered in frost. So you can see from the photo that their fur looks frosty. They are the biggest bat found in Georgia, 16 inches wingspan. So it's still not a big critter, but a 16-inch wingspan. And these guys migrate. They actually leave our state completely in the winter and go to South America. They are solitary and they are a moth specialist. And okay, now we're on the correct sides. This is the hoary bats range map. So you can see they completely leave, they range all the way up to Canada and even Iceland. And they migrate all the way down into South America. That's a huge migration for a bat that has to flap for every wing beat. All right, back to, here's our silver-haired bat. And you can see why they're silver tipped. These guys are also solitary and they do also migrate, but we don't know as much about their migration as we do about the hoary bats. And just a random piece of information, most of the rabies cases in Georgia are somehow coming from silver-haired bats. They can trace the virus back to a virus specific to this bat, but don't know why. Also not sure why, but silverhead bats are the most killed bats at wind farms. 75% of bats killed at wind farms are silver-haired bats. But they don't have as big a migration. And this doesn't show the separate winter and summer because we really don't know yet. And we're trying to learn. Silverhead bats are a big dead tree specialist. They need dead trees to roost in. And so with the DNR, when they're managing forests for silver-haired bats, they emphasize leaving up dead trees. All right, here's our other common. This is our last common bat we're going to talk about. This is the tricolored bat. All right, you look at that picture and you're like, okay, that bat is not three colors. Why is this the tricolored bat? Each of its individual hairs is tricolored. They are light colored by the skin, dark colored in the middle, and light colored again on the tips. So that's why they're tricolored. You would never notice that in the field. But that is why they're called tricolored. And they used to be the eastern pipistrelle. If you're old school and you have some old field guides, this is an eastern pipistrelle. And it's the smallest bat in the eastern United States. This is our big cave dwelling bat and it's actually only found in the northern part of Georgia up where we have caves. And they come down, their range comes down to about South Fulton County, and they're not found south of there because we don't have caves. This bat has been hit hard by white nose syndrome. It's about 90% gone from Georgia now. And it has been petitioned to be added to the endangered species list. Just some more pictures of tricolored bats. The pictures on the outside are from Georgia DNR, and the one in the middle is Pete Petavinia with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. With their little pink noses and their pink forearms is what distinguishes these guys. Very tiny though. All right, so our bats are decreasing due to deforestation. People that go exploring in caves don't know that they're interfering with bats, especially in the wintertime. Habitat fragmentation. So the deforestation and the fragmentation is what we hope to address tonight with gardening for bats and trying to create habitat for them in between all these fragments. And okay, before we launch into white nose syndrome, just a little blurb about bats and viruses. We're in the post-COVID era. And do y'all remember when COVID was first on the scene? Folks were saying it was probably bats, right? It probably jumped from bats. Why was that everybody's first guess? All the scientists' first guess is because bats have this lifestyle where they snuggle and they hibernate, and then they can fly and they can spread far and wide, and then they come back together again in the wintertime and they snuggle together. What a perfect lifestyle to spread viruses, right? And so consequently, bats have evolved to be able to deal with viruses and not be killed by them. All the ones that were killed by viruses have been killed off. So bats have a very high capacity to deal with viruses, higher than human beings, of course. And so that is why when new viruses show up in the human population, a lot of people look to bats. So that being said, the new thing that is destroying bats in the United States and in Georgia is not a virus, it is a fungus. This is a picture of some bats, and they are not supposed to have white muzzles. They're not supposed to have white noses. That is a fungus growing on these bats. And it's, like athlete's foot. It's just a fungus growing on their noses and on their wings. And so it is called white nose syndrome. And white nose syndrome arrived in the United States in 2006. And ground zero is purple. So that is New York State. This fungus is common in Europe. Somebody apparently walked through a cave in Europe and then walked through a cave in New York State and brought the fungus to the United States. We had no idea that this fungus would be a problem. In fact, it took a long time for scientists to figure out why these bats in New York were dying. All it does is itch and irritate the bats. However, we're talking about bats that hibernate in caves. And when they are itchy and irritated, it pulls them out of hibernation. And every time they have to wake up and their metabolism comes up, it burns calories. And hibernating for a winter is not an easy thing to do. And you have to be adequately fat. And every time these bats are being awakened by this irritation, it was burning calories. And so what they found in New York in that first winter were bats flying around in the dead of winter looking for insects that were not there because they were starving and they were getting ready to die and they had nothing to lose by going out in the snow and looking for insects. So that you can see by this great little map how it is spread across the United States and how it got into Georgia around about 2015, 2014. The map on the right, the red is where we have positively found it. The blue is where they have tested for it and not found it. You might notice that these blue counties are all in rows, and that's because they follow interstates. And when we test bats, the easiest way to find bats in the winter is to drive the interstate. And when there's a culvert, a tunnel where a creek runs under the interstate, they pull over and walk through that tunnel in the middle of winter and they swab the bats. So that's why those blues are all in lines. So what can we do to help prevent the spread of white nose syndrome? If you are a cave explorer, always, always, always clean your gear. What else can we do to help? The Department of Natural Resources is our go-to group to save Georgia bats. They have an excellent website with lots of information on our Georgia bats, and they have a wonderful list of plants that you can plant to support bats. And we're going to put a link to that in the chat. But some other things, they ask that if you have bats roosting on your property, inside your structure, your house, or in a tree, they ask that twice a summer, you set up a lawn chair at sunset and you watch your bats leave for the evening and you count them and you report those counts twice a summer. That is no big deal. A bigger deal is you can volunteer with the DNR and run acoustic transects. What is that? Well, that's what our picture is here. I have run an acoustic transect for DNR. This is a microphone that you suction cup to the top of your car, and you drive 20 miles at 20 miles an hour. So it takes an hour to go 20 miles. And this thing listens for bats and records them. And what's cool is that our different species of bats echolocate at different pitches. And the driver here, they can't hear anything, but this device lowers the pitch. And so the driver can hear what's getting recorded. And the device itself can figure out which species of bats are getting recorded by the pitch. And then you can also volunteer to tables at festivals or do speaking engagements like this. I'm a volunteer speaker for the Georgia Bat Working Group in Georgia DNR. The Georgia Bat Working Group is just a group of Georgia people who are interested in bats. They come from the Department of Transportation, the DNR, or just people like me who are just bat fangirls. All right, so we went through our list of the most common metro bats. And did you notice that in all the times I mentioned what those bats ate, I did not say mosquitoes, did I? The web loves to say, oh, bats, they can eat 500 mosquitoes a night. They can eat 5,000 mosquitoes a night. They can eat 10,000 mosquitoes a night. The numbers just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And like I did the math and I'm like, well, that's like one mosquito every 0.3 seconds. I mean, some of the numbers are just ridiculously exaggerated. But if we count Georgia bats, our Georgia bats are beetle and moth specialists, but they are generalists. If they see a mosquito in front of them, sure, they will eat it. But we don't have any bats here that primarily eat mosquitoes. And I know that makes you sad. Everybody hears the stories, oh, you put a bat box in your yard and they'll eat all your mosquitoes. That's really not true. But the good news is we are here to learn how to garden for bats. And if we were gardening for bats, how would we do it? If they were mosquito specialists, we would go to the landfill and get old tires and fill them with rainwater and breed up a bunch of mosquitoes, right? Nobody wants to do that. If you wanted to attract bats, you would have to attract mosquitoes. No, we need beetles and moths. So that's kind of the good news. All right, how do we attract beetles and moths to our yards? That is the base of our food chain, right? Is the insects. And all of you folks that garden for birds already know this. How do we get our insects into our yards? Is with native plants. Our insects have all evolved to eat our native plants. And if you want insects in your yard, that is the route you have to go. Not to throw like Gibbs Gardens under the bus, but if you ever birded Gibbs Gardens up in Ball Ground, I had a friend that got a membership there and she said, oh, let's go bird up there. And you know what? There's mockingbirds in the parking lot, but there are no birds up there because everything is Asian and they spray a lot of pesticides. So if you want bats or birds in your yard, We need native plants, and we need for you to avoid pesticides, because our bats are eating insects. We don't want to get rid of our insects. Those of you that are butterfly enthusiasts know that butterflies and moths are picky. Monarchs, for example, will only eat milkweed. Our Gulf fritillaries, which are more common in Georgia, eat only passion vine, which is a beautiful vine. Luna moths, because we're talking bats here, so we're more talking moths, are a little bit more of a generalist, but they do use sweet gum trees. The Bible for this is Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy. And then there's actually a book out there, Gardening for Moths. If you really want to get specific down to gardening for moths, this one is the region that this book is about is south of the Great Lakes, but I found it really applies to Georgia as well. So yeah, we were talking host plants. Like we said, we have host plants for butterflies. We have host plants for moths. By the way, the #1 tree in this book for moths is red oak. #2 is white oak, and #3 is black cherry. So those are all trees that are found in Georgia, and they are hosts for 400 plus species of moths. Some more tips for attracting moths and beetles. Moths, their life cycle, once they become moths, their job is to find a mate and lay eggs and die. My favorite moth is the Luna moth in this picture here. And the reason they have these big fuzzy antennas is because their life is dictated by pheromones, by odors, not by sight, not by sound. Most moths cannot hear. So when you're thinking planting for moths, you need to plant things that are fragrant. So something with fragrant flowers, and a lot of your white flowers are more fragrant because they have evolved to be pollinated by moths. But fruiting trees also, moths are very drawn to the scent of rotting fruit. So if you have a fruit tree and it's dropping stuff on the ground, leave it there. That's going to bring in your moths. Provide a lot of shelter in terms of leaving brush piles and dead trees, and of course, avoid pesticides. Your mosquito guy is going to tell you, oh no, this only kills mosquitoes, and we all know that that's not true. Shelter. Okay, so to drill down a little bit on shelter, leaf litter, leaf litter, leaf litter. As we said before, we even have a species of bat here that normally they will hibernate hanging by 1 foot in your tree. And you can imagine this teeny reddish brown bat hanging by one leg looks just like a dead leaf. But when we get these really, really cold snaps, like remember we had that 9-degree day back in March, April, they will drop down out of the tree and burrow down into the leaf litter to stay warm. Then also leaving up our dead trees. This is a great solution. You don't want to leave a dead tree up that's hanging over your house, or it's going to drop a big limb on a path. But you can do is lop it off at 8 feet here. It's not going to fall over. And you can see, boy, the woodpeckers have gone to town looking for all the bugs in this big dead tree. And bugs are gardening for bats. So yeah, leave your dead trees up. And like we said, silver-haired bats need dead trees for roosting. So that's also a roost for silver-haired bats. But leaf litter, that's not just for bats. We have a lot of Georgia animals that require leaf litter. The Georgia state bird, the brown thrasher, is a leaf litter specialist. That's why he's a thrasher, because he is hunting in your leaf litter and it makes a lot of noise. So that's why he is the brown thrasher. Our salamanders require leaf litter. Box turtles require leaf litter. All these animals require leaf litter. So, I know we all want a tidy yard that impresses the neighbors, but try to leave somewhere with some nice leaf litter that stays there all year round for our Georgia wildlife. Oh, but I thought I might add a little extra info as far as bats and bugs, because I love fireflies. And I think it's one of the most wonderful things about living in the Southeast is our beautiful fireflies. Bats do not eat fireflies. And one of the reasons that scientists think fireflies flash like they do is it's an advertisement to bats to not eat them. Imagine, y'all been around, I don't know if y'all grew up here, but you go out and catch fireflies just right out of the air. Those male fireflies, they just hover right there in the middle of the air, and they would be a sitting duck for a bat. But since they light up, that tells the bat, do not eat me, I taste nasty. So even if you attract bats to your yard, you're still gonna have tons of fireflies, which I love. Okay, and those of you also that are native plant fans know that we need to pull out our non-native plants, which are strangling out our native plants. I took the photo there. That is Johnson Ferry South, and that's in the winter. You can see the trees are bare. So every bit of green in that photo is Chinese privet. We are really getting taken over by Chinese privet. And English ivy is really getting bad as well. But y'all can look through that list and see some of our invasive plants that are cutting off our natives, and that's cutting down on our insect life. All right, so learning more about native plants. We do have a Georgia Native Plant Society, and they are an excellent resource. And Dottie's going to put in the chat the pointer to their web page, and they have a list of nurseries where you can buy native plants. Unfortunately, our big box stores are not on board. They still sell these invasives. You can go to Home Depot today and buy English ivy and Chinese privet. So you really need to check with the Native Plant Society for a list of those specialized plant nurseries. Georgia Audubon has an awesome brochure with native plants for birds, and we will also put that in the chat. And you can download that awesome brochure. It's just a PDF that'll come straight to your phone, or you can go right there and print it out. Monarchs across Georgia, and the National Wildlife Federation also has a plant finder tool. You type in your zip code, and it'll tell you which native plants grow in our zip code. And National Audubon also has a plant finder as well. Not Georgia Audubon, but National Audubon. And just a quick list, y'all can see the sources for native plants. Probably the biggest native plant sale in the metro area is Chattahoochee Nature Centers, and they do spring and fall. Nearly Native is down south of town. All these will be listed on the Georgia Native Plant Society webpage. But also master gardeners are getting on board with this. And I think I already mentioned everything else on that slide. Okay, so here's the promised bit on bat boxes. Okay, y'all know I will be straight with you, right? Okay. Bat boxes are not that great for luring bats to your yard. You're much better off gardening for bats and creating a support structure in terms of food. Bats do not typically move into bat boxes because unlike birds, I tell people you put up a bluebird box, more than 50% chance you're going to get birds moving into that box. Might not be bluebirds, might be titmouse or chickadee or nuthatches, but odds are you're going to get birds in that box because cavities for birds are really hard to come by. Cavities for bats like very, very tight spaces that they have to squeeze into. You saw we have one bat that's a tree bark specialist. We have lots of tree bark in our yards, right? So bats have an easier time finding places to roost. Secondly, they will never hibernate in your bat box. Bat boxes, the temperature fluctuates way too much. They warm up way too much. So the only time you will get bats is in the summertime. The bats that like bat boxes the most are free-tailed bats, and Atlanta is just out of the range of Mexican free-tailed bats. They come about to almost to South Fulton. But if you are going to get a bat box, do your research. It's counterintuitive. They like their temperatures hot, but they're very specific. The one on the left is kind of the old school one, right? And the one on the right is the newer design. What the advantage of this new design is these are concentric boxes. So when it warms up on one side of the box, they can be on that side. And then when it gets too hot, they scoot around to the side or they scoot around to the back and they can regulate their temperature that way. With this flat design, they're just stuck with whatever temperature the sun creates inside that bat box. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so yeah, more information. These are just some, if you want to take a picture of this with your phone, GeorgiaWildlife.com is the DNR. GeorgiaBats.org is the Georgia Bat Working Group. BatCon is Bat Conservation International, and they are based out of Austin, Texas. And then the rest of these, those are in the chat. And that is all I have for you, you all tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed that and learned something tonight. I'm going to stop my share and we'll go to the view of everybody and pull up the chat.
Okay, we've got some questions. I can relay them to you if that'll be easier. Roseanne, thank you very much. Very interesting. We have some questions that came in via chat, so let me ask those first, and then I'll go to the Q&A. Hold on. Did the Americas ever have megabats, or have we always?
No, I don't believe the Americas have ever had megabats.
Okay. And are bats rabies vector species?
They are, and but they are not the #1 rabies vector in Georgia. The #1 rabies vector in Georgia is raccoons and foxes. Bats are the cause for some rabies infections in Georgia. And I have been asked, you know, when you're walking your dog and those bats are just like right above your head and they're snagging those moths and beetles out of the air, do I have to worry about that? And the answer is no. If the bat's doing its bat thing, you are safe. If you encounter a downed bat, if the bat is acting ill, always treat it as if it is a rabies possibility. It's not. A lot of bats, once they are on the ground for whatever reason, they can't just leap up into the air and fly away. They need to drop from a certain height to take off. And so sometimes that will happen. You'll find a bat that's grounded and they just can't take off from the ground. That being said, if you find a downed bat, always treat it as if it could possibly have rabies. So do not touch it. If you are ever bitten or scratched by any wildlife, not just a bat, always go to your doctor and get checked. If you're as old as I am, you remember being told as a kid, you know, oh, if you get bitten by a wild animal, it's this long needle, they stick it in your stomach and it's horrible. That was the case back then, but that is not the case anymore. I have been through a rabies vaccine series myself, and it's all just shots in the arm. It was not bad. Always check with your doctor. But if y'all want to, you know, go down the rabies rat hole a bit, in the world, on our planet, there's about 60,000 human deaths from rabies a year. 60,000. In the United States, we average 1 to 2. And why is it so low here? Is because we vaccinate our pets and we get rid of strays. As as sad as that might be, but that is why we do not have human rabies cases. And that being said, more than a third of the people in the US that die of rabies were bitten by dogs in some other country, came back here and died of rabies. So we have to count that. 99% of the cases of rabies in the world are from dog bites, and we do not have that here in the United States. A lot of years in the US, we have 0. In 2021, we did have 5, but 2 of those were people that got bitten by dogs somewhere else. One was a gentleman who was bitten. He knew he was bitten, but he was an anti-vaxxer and died of rabies. One was a family that didn't know you should go to your doctor, and they lost a child to rabies. It's a bad way to go, guys. If you are bitten or scratched by any wild animal, do go get checked out. All right, sorry, that was
Okay, moving on. We got lots of questions here. How likely are we to see bats in forests and leaf litter in the metro Atlanta or trees in the metro Atlanta area?
They're very small and very camouflaged. It is tough to spot bats. The best way to spot bats is to be out on a warm day, right at dusk, and watch them out hunting. It's tough to spot them. In leaf, very tough. Yeah, we had a picture with a bat and it was really hard to spot. And that's an animal that's only about like yay. No, they're very, very hard to spot in leaf litter, but they're there. They need it.
What is the cause of white-nosed bat syndrome?
It is a fungus, and it has a long name, but it's P. destructans. And like I said, it's a fungus that grows on their skin. And think of it like smallpox when Europeans came and the Native Americans had no immunity to smallpox, but the Europeans did. It's the same scenario. The bats in Europe have had to deal with this fungus for a long time, and their immune systems can defeat it. But the bats in North America, we didn't know this, but the bats in North America, their immune system just couldn't handle it. So yeah, our cave-dwelling bats in North Georgia are down 90%. When it first entered the United States, the DNR started counting bats, even though they knew it wasn't here yet. But the only way we are going to know how our bats are affected is to get the baseline. So in late 2000, after 2006, they started counting bats in the winter. And then once it got here in 2014, they could see the populations crash. It went from thousands of bats to 0 to a couple dozen in some of the caves up in North Georgia. Yeah, it's awful.
Somebody asked, they say they always think of bats flying above the tree line. Will they hunt beetles and moths down at the level of your yard?
Different species hunt at different heights. So it depends on what kind of bat you're talking. It depends on the species. But the lowest I've seen bats, a lot of bats will hunt low over water because your bugs will be lower over water. But yeah, when I'm finding them in my neighborhood, they're usually around 8 to 10 feet. But it depends on species.
Somebody wants to know if the Bats of Georgia poster is available as a PDF or where you can get a copy.
You can go to the DNR website and you can order one of these. Yeah, and they'll send you one.
It's a cool poster. I've seen.
Cool poster. I know.
It is a cool poster.
One in a raffle, and it's all beat up. You can see it's all, the corners are messed up. It's got a lot of miles on it. And you can order stuff,
Here's a fun one. When someone asks, why would we want to garden for bats? What would be your answer?
Well, bats are wonderful animals, but I know people have fears around bats, but they are part of our ecosystem. They are a necessary part of our ecosystem. They deserve to live, and bats are in trouble, and we can make a real difference. That is why you should garden for bats. But like you said, gardening for bats is also gardening for birds. It's gardening for amphibians, for salamanders. It's gardening for reptiles. It's gardening for box turtles. It's entering the ecosystem, and but our bats. One of the reasons I got into bats personally is because of the white nose syndrome, and my children and my grandchildren are going to see fewer bats than I did as a kid. Bats are very slow reproducers. They only produce one or maybe two, depending on species, 1 to 2 babies per year. That is a really slow reproduction rate. And they make up for it by living a long time. Bats live 30 years and they are little bitty animals. I know, it's pretty amazing. So they are very slow to come back from any big knockdown in population. So they really need our human help. They need us to reconnect all those disconnected habitats so they can find each other and keep going.
Someone is asking why, certain cities like Austin, Texas have big famous bat populations and we don't in Atlanta, though I know we do up at the Nick Jack Bat Cave in Tennessee. And I know that there are bats that come out in North Georgia up at Petty John Cave on Johns Creek, WMA. Is it different species or what is the reason for those big populations?
Species. Like we talked about, the hoary bats and the silver-haired bats are both, and even the big browns are solitary. So you're not going to get these big, massive millions of bats. Those are solitary bats. But we do have the little browns. But those big, big groups of bats that hang out together, they need caves. And so we don't have big caves in Metro Atlanta. We don't have big caves in South Georgia or coastal Georgia. But yeah, like Dottie said, to have our big groups of bats and the big, when they exit the caves and it's thousands and thousands of bats, that'll be little browns, which we've lost a lot of. And Mexican freetails also will roost in giant groups like that. If you go to Austin and you go to the Austin Congress Bridge, yeah, those are Mexican freetails. And Atlanta is out of the range of the Mexican freetail bats. So, and we also don't have caves. So that is why in Atlanta, we don't see those big groups of bats like that.
Do moths have any defenses against bats?
That is a really interesting topic. Moths and bats have co-evolved for millions of years. And you'll know I kept showing you the picture of the Luna moth because that's my favorite moth. And Luna moths have those streamers that twirl off of their hind wings. Scientists did a study and they cut off those little streamers, and those are not involved in flight. The ones without the streamers flew just as well as the ones with. The role of those twisty streamers off the tails of a Luna moth is to jam bat echolocation. The way they twirl, imagine I'm echolocating and that twirly bit makes my echolocate go off in different directions, as opposed to the wing, which is this solid thing that's going to echolocate straight back. So they also, they cut the streamers off those Luna moths and released a bat in there. And the ones without the streamers got nailed by bats at a much higher rate than the ones with the streamers. And I talked about how only a few moths can hear. A few moths are starting to evolve the ability to hear. They don't need to be able to hear to find their mates, right? They use that with smell, with their antennas. Why would they evolve the ability to hear? To evade bats. The ones that can hear, they don't have ears yet. They have primitive ways of hearing. What pitch can they hear? Bat echolocations. Some moths are starting to evolve to emit sound. What sound do they emit? The same pitch as bat echolocation. It's to throw off bats. So they have been co-evolving with each other. Another reason people find bats kind of ugly. Remember that picture of that big brown bat? And he was kind of fuzzy and puppy, but he had a big old mouthful of teeth, right? Well, think about what these bats are hunting. A big brown bat did not evolve to eat mosquitoes with that mouth full of giant teeth. Think about a June bug. A June bug has a hard, round carapace, right? When a bat bites down on that hard and round just gets, it flies right out of the bat's mouth. That's why a lot of your insects have hard shells. It's to keep that bat being able to bite down onto them. And so that's a beetle's defense against bats. And that's why bats have these giant things of teeth, because they got to hang on to smooth, round beetles. So yeah, the whole moth and beetle and bat evolution is such an interesting topic. Google it, and just so many interesting things to learn on that topic.
I'm going to feed you one more question and then we're going to wrap it up because we're past the top of the hour here. Other than trees, what are your top recommendations for native plants that will attract bats?
Okay, yeah, we need dead trees. A lot of our bird plants are great for bats as well. So beautyberry, like I said, cherry, because that's going to be release your odors, bring your moths in. Dogwood is a great one. Trumpet vine is a great one. Also, believe it or not, poison ivy produces a lot of fruit in the fall, and that is awesome for birds as well as insects. So that brings in bats. We just need general cover. So once again, yeah, trumpet vine and poison ivy are great for cover for our bats that are up in the trees. But yeah, for that, we go back to bringing nature home. And that's going to be where to start on what are your biggest insect attracting variety of insect attracting plants. And yeah, the number one things up there are your great big oak trees. That's your number one thing for insects, and that's your number one thing for bats.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. I just dropped Roseanne's Georgia Audubon email address in the chat because there were some questions that didn't get answered. And so if you have a burning question that you must know the answer to, please feel free to to email Roseanne, and hopefully she can get the answer to you. Roseanne, thanks very much. And thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a tremendous evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes, thanks so much, everybody.